Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the last of the little section, if you want to think of it as a section, that I called the Psalms section, the song section, although technically we can't really call this the last, because the first poem in the next section, Birds of Passage, is called Song of the Universal. But this is kind of coming to an end. The 12 total poems that will be a part of what we call this Psalms section, to consider the Leaves of Grass as a possible New American Bible, as we were talking about how Whitman perceived his Leaves of Grass. If Leaves of Grass is in fact kind of quasi-biblical text, then what is it that it kind of it looks like in this section? The Psalm section, the song section. You'll remember Salute 'Em On is there, Open Road, Brooklyn Ferry, Answer, Song of the Answer, the Old Foliage, Joys, Song of the Broad Axe, Exposition, Redwood Tree, Occupations, and then we just finished with Song of the Rolling Earth. Now our assumption is that you've been with us at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt is our playlist, and hopefully you've been with us from the very beginning with inscriptions all the way through our conversations about Rolling Earth. And this little four-line poem, quite remarkable. Norton's, as we often like to reference, Norton says it this way: this poem is composed of 4 lines retained from the 1855 poem, Great Are the Myths, when it was excluded from Leaves of Grass 1881. They had been lines 19 through 22 of the original piece, which was the final poem of the first edition. Now, as I began to read a poem like this with you, I like to go back and hear the echoes, as we've done so many times. So let's go back now to Song of Myself 45. So let's play this game. Do you remember this set of lines? We've already obviously exegeted them in some detail, but I love to remind ourselves. Oh, span of youth, ever pushed elasticity, oh, manhood balanced, florid and full. My lovers suffocate me, crowding my lips thick in the pores of my skin, jostling me through streets and public halls, coming naked to me at night, crying by day, ahoy from the rocks of the river, swinging and chirping over my head, calling my name from flower beds, vines, tangled underbrush, lighting on every moment of my life, bussing my body with balsamic busses, noiselessly passing handfuls out of their hearts and giving them to be mine. Old age superbly rising, oh, welcome inevitable grace of dying days. And then he says it, every condition promulgates not only itself, it promulgates what grows after and out of itself, and the dark hush promulgates as much as any. Now, youth, day, old age, and night is the poem that we're looking at now, and it's quite a fascinating little 4-line offering. Let's read it and then let's talk about it. Youth, large, lusty, loving, youth full of grace, force, fascination. Do you know that old age may come after you with equal grace, force, fascination? Day full-blown and splendid, day of the immense sun, action, ambition, laughter. The night follows close with millions of suns and sleep and restoring darkness. Now there's been some debate, of course, about this poem. Is it to be read as somewhat kind of defeatist, or is it to be read as rather, as Whitman always said it, I always pursue the sunny side of life? I think that in fact this is a poem that's going to deal in almost like we would say Taoist, like yin-yang like paradoxes. Of course, notice the title is not actually the first line of the poem, as is often the case in Leaves of Grass, but rather you notice youth. By the way, the first use of youth will be, of course, as you'll remember it, in Song of Myself, passage 3, and then it'll be used 14 times to now. So clearly, Whitman the teacher, as we have said, as one of our Whitman's P's, right, pedagogue, teacher, Whitman's very concerned with youth, but he's also deeply concerned with this idea of what it's like to age, what it's like to grow old. Notice we'll begin with the word youth, and then we're going to go large. We're going to use this word lusty. You'll remember from Song of Myself, passage 41, as well as I Sing the Body Electric, passage 2, his use of the word lusty. Loving, so notice you've got 3 L words that are stacked together. Then you've got the dash, which will remind us, of course, of Emily Dickinson. And then we come back to the word youth for the second time. Youth, full of grace. Did you notice the word grace was used in Song of Myself 45 that I just read? Force, fascination. So you've got, again, the Trinity, the three. So notice the poetic balancing that's happening here. And then, as we've seen so regularly in Leaves of Grass, this intimacy. He loves to ask the question directly to you, the reader. Do you know that old age, by the way, notice that it is both capitalized, may come after you with equal grace, force, fascination. Now, this phrase, come after you, obviously the word may is interesting, but may, it's like a potentiality, the fallibilist position epistemologically, as we've shared in earlier lectures. This idea, this phrase of come after you, obviously it can mean follow, but it can also mean chase, right? May come after you with equal grace, force, fascination. And the idea, of course, of grace, and then the S sounds. Did you hear it? Grace, force, fascination. So I think Whitman's having all kinds of auditory fun here. In other words, what's his question? Of course, we're always excited about youth. But what about old age? Notice capitalize O, capitalize A. That is to say, at what point in your life, and you guys obviously very young, will you no longer consider yourself young, but now you're ready to move into old age? And is it possible that the very idea of grace and force and fascination could continue into old age? Now notice this is a rhetorical question, and notice the word may is used, but it is possible. He's going to make the argument. It is possible. And then notice a little bit of a break, and then we'll come back. Day, full-blown, by the way, that's the only use in all Leaves of Grass of the hyphenated full-blown, and splendid. You'll remember splendid from For You, O Democracy, this splendid race. Splendid, and then again the hyphen. Again, so there's beautiful balancing that's happening here, because obviously we're talking about youth and old age. I mean, go back to what we said, for example, in our study of the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and the ways in which those poems, and obviously we could say all great epics, they always play that game of youth and old age, right? So notice, day, full-blown and splendid, day of the immense sun, action, ambition, laughter. Notice, again, it's either 3 or it's 4, depending upon how you count it, the list there. The word immense, which is a word in Leaves of Grass we're obviously going to pay some attention to. The day full-blown and splendid could obviously mean the life of a youth that's already coming to its old age, right? Action, ambition, and laughter are all central to our reading of Leaves of Grass. One of the really cool things, and it's why I've recommended that you buy your own copy of Leaves of Grass and just work with me every single poem, because after a while you begin to recognize that Whitman was playing with certain ideas, themes, motifs that constantly come back, and he loves this idea of laughter. Why can't life have more laughter? Then the last line begins with a capital N for night. The night, right, follows close. Right, come after, follows close. With millions of suns, and sleep, and restoring darkness. Now, this idea of comes close can mean obviously proximity in a number of ways, both physical as well as metaphysical. Night here can be symbolic, obviously. That is to say, the night comes on. We're familiar with this in Leaves of Grass already. And, I mean, just from passage 45 and the darkness under the ground, obviously Song of Myself, passage 6. The night follows close with millions of suns. Now, of course, as we've said, Whitman was very interested in the new science of his day. And so here, you know, this idea of millions of suns. Obviously, it plays around with the idea of evolution. Some have read this as somewhat defeatist. That is to say, what Marcus Aurelius says in Meditations, soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you. And then, of course, sleep can be and is in Leaves of Grass, both literal as well as metaphysical. And the paradox, restoring darkness, right? And this idea of restoring darkness leads to the next growth. I mean, you'll remember what he says in Song of Myself, passage 6, which is, of course, one of the most famous sets of lines at the very end, right? What do you think has become of the young and old men? And what do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed and luckier. I think this word restoring, for restoring darkness, is enough for us to argue that this is a poem which needs to be read with a certain level of optimism. To that degree, is it a song that fits in with the other psalms? I think it can be read very easily with, like, Song of the Open Road. I mean, to just jump now to 2a really quickly, what are we going to say about the messages or the themes here? Well, I think this is a reminder poem that life is about reconciling opposites, youth, old age, and the like. Obviously, the circle of life, you know, for the Lion King fans in the house. Another major message, obviously, is we only get to swing, the way we've said it so many times. I mean, they were teaching us from a young age, the van's waiting, right? It was always, it's time to leave the park and you're swinging as a child. I don't want to go to the van. No, you got to go to the van. You can't stay here and swing forever. They were teaching us this very simple truth. You don't get to swing. I don't get to swing. We don't get to swing at the park very long. So, let's swing well. Because the van has always been waiting. It's always coming, right? And there will be others that get to swing at the park after us. And that's important for us to remind ourselves. And 2b, well, the use of the dash is compelling in this poem, and it gives that sense of balance. And I would just recommend that we take a look at the way Emily Dickinson has done this. We've given a number of lectures at learnstrong.net on the poetry of Dickinson to kind of point this out. At 3a, I've mentioned Dickinson. We talked about Marcus Aurelius. I'd like to remind you of Shakespeare's As You Like It, the famous 7 Ages of Man passage at learnstrong.net. We've given a full explication of that one. The ways in which life can be perceived as living in stages from, obviously, very, very early, that is to say birth or even pre-birth, to death and everything in between. Finally, at 3b, as we now finish this psalm section, although we're about to turn to a Song of the Universal, so we're really not yet done with the songs of Leaves of Grass, and obviously all the poems are to some degree songs, but what are your thoughts about age and aging? Do you think it is true that today in our postmodern society that we can age into and gracefully into the restoring darkness, to use the language of the poem? And how about what you'll remember Tennyson's Ulysses will say, right? I mean, there lies the port, the vessel puffs her sails, there gloom the dark broad seas. My mariners' souls that have told and wrought and thought with me that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. I think some of those lines are sitting behind a set of lines like this. Or you'll remember that T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets poetry that we love in 303, his East Coker 5, old men ought to be explorers here and there, does not matter. We must be still and still moving, right? That idea of there's always something else to be done. Think of course, Plato's Phaedo, and Socrates is about to drink his hemlock shake, and he's giddy, he's excited. Why? Because he's the new Odysseus taking a trip. Well, I'll challenge you to think about that. Can you find ways to age with grace towards restoring darkness? I hope that our reading of Leaves of Grass is helping us to all be able to do that. We now turn to a collection of some 7 poems in a little section called Birds of Passage. I'm excited for us to get there. We're going to have some fun there as well, I hope. Thank you.